Yeah, so I talked about this week being, probably my most anticipated week. Turned into the unexpected with like Final Fantasy VII and stuff. But I've been so looking forward to this game since it was announced a couple of years ago. A couple of months ago, because I'm a huge fan of Kingdom of Amalur Reckoning, and was really looking forward to see what an entirely new publisher and developer actually does with it and what they did. So, can I ask, Intergot, do you know anything about this game at all?
Not at all.
Not at
Like when you said this, like if someone said, "Is this a game? Is this a real game or not?" I would not be able to know. I'd just have to guess.
all. Okay, that's good because this game has a history, to put it lightly. So, do you know much about baseball?
Yeah, I know a lot about baseball.
Do you know much about the Red Sox?
Yeah, of course. Boston Red Sox.
Do you know anyone by the name of Kurt Schilling?
No.
Okay, fair enough. So basically,
Oh, actually, geez, man, I know what this story is now. It just clicked when you said that.
yes. So
This is the investment stuff. Yeah, yeah. Go into this. This is cool.
yes. So basically, this game originally was developed by Big Huge Games and 38 Studios, and it was published by EA. This was a AAA published title. Like, it was huge at the time. It had actually a really big marketing budget. Like, it was everywhere. It actually had a lot of buzz before it came out. This was not a game that kind of just no one knew about and then just disappeared. But it definitely, when it came out, it didn't set the world on fire. It had actually pretty decent sales, but it wasn't like the next Elder Scrolls level of stuff that they were wanting it to be. But the history of this is so weird. So basically, 38 Studios was owned by Kurt Schilling, so former Red Sox baseball pitcher, and he started working with a best-selling author called R.L. Salvatore, or Salvatore, I'm not sure how to say it, a fantasy author, to create basically this big universe with like a 10,000-year history, and they were going to build this big MMO, and it was going to be called Copernicus. Then, basically, I guess as part of this, he struck a deal with Rhode Island and the Rhode Island governor, and to basically, essentially help fund everything to do with this project. And they relocated all the studios to the capital city, Providence, in exchange for like $75 million in bonds. And the idea was it would help stimulate their economy. So as part of this, so that was 38 Studios. They acquired Big Huge Games, who were already working on an existing single player RPG, and they actually essentially combined that into this universe, and that's what ended up becoming Kingdom of Amalur: Reckoning. So the idea is this would start a franchise, and it's pretty crazy who they had working on this. So heading up Big Huge Games was Ken Rolston, who was the executive designer, and he worked on Morrowind and Oblivion. So huge pedigree and obviously fantasy RPGs and action RPGs. That R.L. Salvatore that I mentioned was doing the lore. You had Todd McFarlane working on the artwork of the game,
Oh, cool.
and you had Grant Kirkhope working on the musical score from
Oh, wow. What the hell?
Banjo Kazooie, Goldeneye. So this game was like
Interesting.
it was like the super group of gaming.
Yeah.
It was it was really like this game had. That's what I said. Like this game had a lot of buzz to it, and it came out in February 2012 to generally actually pretty good reviews. But as I said, it didn't set the world on fire for sales. I think at the 90-day mark, I'm not sure if this is just US or worldwide, but it had sold like 1.2 million copies at 90 days.
Mm,
Not huge, but not tiny either.
yeah.
But the problem is, this game came out 3 months after Skyrim.
Oh,
So it doesn't matter how good their marketing budget was, and the trailers were actually pretty cool. Like as I said, a lot of people are hyped about this game. Skyrim hit, and Skyrim was like the biggest thing in the gaming world for like the next 12 months at least, I reckon.
yeah.
I'm not sure timeline wise when GTA 5 came out, if it was kind of creeping in this same time frame, but it was, yeah, man, at that point, you just got to put it down to that is the worst possible timing to release a new big open world RPG. It's 3 months after Skyrim.
That would be a really cool segment to do, just to talk about games that were released within, you know, I know in this case it's not weeks, but you know, there are some games that are released like within a month of those type of level of titles and just absolutely get buried. Like just get body slammed by these games.
Yeah, I think the perfect example is what was that hobby grade shooter, the one from Gearbox that launched alongside Overwatch. I can't even remember the name of it, but it was essentially like when you're launching the same like 2-month period as Overwatch and you look very similar. I can't
you're in trouble.
It, I can't believe it. So to get back to Amalur, so the game had a bit of a controversy. So this was around the time of the online pass. So do you remember? I don't think you were massively into gaming around this time frame. Do you know anything about the whole online pass era?
No.
Okay, so what it was is a lot of games started to include an online pass, and the idea was it was a code that came with the game when you bought it at retail.
Oh, I think I do know this. Is this? Yeah, go into it. But I think this is where you almost need to like have something like Xbox Live, and then also have this thing to get into it. So they are preventing like used game sales and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly right. So it was a code that basically meant if you purchase a game used, you couldn't access, let's say, the online features of online games. Or in a weird example, the Saboteur. There was like your main base in that game was like a burlesque club, and it was like a VIP room in the club that actually had like actual people on poles and nudity and stuff. Saboteur's actually
Which game is this? So I can avoid it, of course.
the Saboteur.
Okay, Saboteur, avoid that game.
A really good game, but that VIP part was the online pass. So it had nothing to do with multiplayer. It was just, hey, you know, and again, they may not have called it online pass themselves, but that's essentially what it was. And Amalur had this as well. And it had about 7 quests locked behind it, and also had things like Shepard's Armor from Mass Effect behind it and things like that. Like, as I said, this game was an EA game. It had a huge kind of push behind it, and there was even an achievement locked behind it. So if you bought this game used, you could not actually unlock that achievement without going and purchasing, because you could purchase that code separately via
Now, how did all the might of true achievements not bring this game down? That's what I want to know.
But what's interesting is Microsoft's own terms around how achievements are meant to be put in games actually said that you cannot put achievements behind additional purchase content.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so and
wait, but they do that. They do that because with DLC, right?
No, so that base game achievements, not add-on.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay, so it breached the rules.
Yeah, kind of, because technically, if you bought the game new, you had that content. So it's let's just say the online pass went the way of the dodo, thankfully, because it was.
Thankfully,
I understand why they wanted to do it, but anyway, so. There was a bit of controversy about that, and after the game basically didn't, sell that well, the actual Rhode Island governor at the time, so not the same guy that I guess approved the previous one, said that essentially the game failed and they needed to sell over 3 million copies just to break even. And so he basically said that it was the worst investment that's ever been made in the history of Rhode Island, according to. It's crazy that the game is so linked into that. And basically 3 months later, 38 Studios filed for bankruptcy with 150 million in debt. And Kurt Schilling lost apparently about 115 million of his own money from this endeavor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And, I have to say this is terrible, but whenever I hear about Rhode Island, I always think about the great Farrelly Brothers movie, Me, Myself, and Irene, starring Jim Carrey. Because that, like, Rhode Island's heavily featured in that movie.
Oh, man. And that leads us to basically THQ Nordic purchasing the rights to the game in 2018. So that leads us to Kingdom of Amalur ReReckoning, which is a remaster of Kingdom of Amalur. And I'm really happy that this game has had another chance at life because as I mentioned before, I'm a huge fan of this game. This game came out on Wednesday. I didn't start playing until Thursday, which I'll explain why. And I've already put like 15 hours into it. And it's like mid-Saturday at the moment. So just put those calculations in mind.
Well, I think we're like, 15 minutes into your Swinpressions? And I think it's all been background so far.
Well, that's because this game has one of the most interesting backgrounds to it, probably of any game, in terms of how it was put together in the development. Um,
Well, can we just talk about THQ Nordic for a sec? I know that you're not even like into your Swinpressions yet,
yeah,
but you know the whole THQ Nordic thing. What it reminds me a little bit about is, you know, Blumhouse Productions.
yes,
That's what I feel like. You know, I remember when Blumhouse sort of started their development. So Blumhouse is, you know, a production house that specializes mostly in horror films, and you know they made it big with Paranormal Activity. But essentially, you know, they look at movies and you know they give the budget that you can make a decent movie like that. You know, a regular person looks at it and goes, they don't notice that it's not $100 million movie. It's a, you know, $10 million budget, $3 million budget type of movie, and then just basically, you know, and this is very sort of a Moneyball kind of thing of, you know, how do you pump out as many of these type of movies, you know, over the course of a year, so that one of them is just going to hit massive. And you know, from your perspective, do you feel like, you know, THQ Nordic are almost trying to do the same with video games?
yes and no. I mean, they have an interesting history going back to Nordic games, and they purchased Joe Wood. Talk about Eurojank. Like, there's a lot of Eurojank in their library. Like, Elix is a big, you know, pure example of that kind of game. So I'm actually like, a lot of their library is the kind of stuff I like to play. So I consider them like, you know, you talk about AAA, they're like a single A publisher in a way. You know, they're kind of,
But
they've got the Darksiders games, which were, you know, a big, you know, they were a big franchise at one point, probably, you know, dropped down a bit.
yeah,
But I mean, they've got a lot of great games in their history. So it's, I think the quality is actually not too bad. It's just they don't have, you know, they're building up, and I think at some point, GHQ Nordic will probably end up being a pretty big publisher. Let's say in, you know, in 10 years' time. So
but I think that's where, you know, they, you know, they are trying to do that kind of Blumhouse approach of, I think they've said publicly that they've got something in the order of like 60 games in development across their publishing relationships and studios they own and things like that. And like, to your point, it's like a at most double A games that they're trying to make.
yeah, but the thing is, they went on a huge purchasing spree a few years ago, and
Mm,
you know, this is one of the things that they got. But you know, like even games like Remnant from the Ashes, and
mm.
that, you know, they're publishing Pillars of Eternity 2 now. Obsidian are owned by Microsoft, so you'd imagine that, you know, any future Pillars of Eternity titles might be published by them. But just, yeah, they've got a, you know, they even have the license for like Red Faction and I think Saints Row and stuff like that as well now. So it's, yeah, it's, I think they're in an interesting spot. And I hope that this game actually does end up selling, you know, well for them. I don't think it's going to set the world on fire again. Definitely not. But I guess to get back to the game. So
Yeah.
Kingdom of Amalur, for anyone who doesn't know, is an open world action RPG set in a very fantasy world. So we're talking trolls, elves, dwarves, things like that. But everything's so refined to this game, and I guess the like just the presentation, and the story in that, it almost feels like a special hits compilation of every fantasy game that's ever existed. And it's basically, yeah, it's hard to kind of, I guess, maybe describe everything about the game, but maybe what I'm going to do is start with actually what's new with the remaster. So for anyone that's already played King of Amalur back in the day, so the game runs at really smooth 60 frames a second, which I'm so happy about because I didn't actually know that when I purchased it. And the game's had really improved textures, so that it actually looks really, really nice, especially compared to the previous console versions. So, and also, I guess to frame it a bit, I've completed this game. I own this game previously 3 different times, and I've played it through on 2 of them. So I'm a lot of experience playing this game, and it's the best I've ever seen it look. It includes all the DLC, includes the pretty sizable expansions, and it adds a new very hard mode, which it actually needed because playing on hard is actually still very easy in the game. It recalculates how it scales up all the enemies for each zone you go into. So instead, in the past, what would happen is you'd enter a zone and it would kind of store that level based on what your character level is. So every time you go back in there, they're gonna be as easy as they were. But they now recalculate it each time you enter, and then there's like a maximum level that they'll go to. They've changed the way that loot's generated across all the maps, and loot's a huge part of this game. There's a bunch of new, like, small quality of life, like new camera settings and things. But the interesting parts are actually plenty new expansion content, which is interesting to me because, like, the stuff that has been done to this that they've worked on is stuff that already existed. So I wonder if they're going to, there's going to be any new lore written by or anything like that. But it's pretty cool that they've actually put a bit of work into this remaster. It looks and plays great. So I guess overall, for anyone that doesn't know much about the game, it's a huge open world game, but it's kind of separated into separate zones. So rather than something like Skyrim where you could walk from one end to the other, this has, like, you look at the map and it's got about 30 big zones that you kind of go through. And every single one of them is absolutely jam-packed full of stuff, whether or not it's obviously enemies, but, secrets. And each of the zones is handcrafted. So unlike some games that are open world where you feel that they've just refined, like, the generated terrain based on, like, auto generation, then cleaned it up. This is similar to, like, Zelda and things like that, or at least early Zelda games, where everything feels handcrafted. And it's similar to, like, games like Greedfall, Gothic, Risen, talk about Eurojank, there you go. And there is cool lore. So the fact that they got the fantasy writer work on it, there's lore stones, and each of them they're basically like audiobooks. So they'll play poetry and songs. It's really, really cool. Very, especially in the early part of the game, it's very Gaelic in tone. With, there's, like, all races like elves or fays and things like that. So it's very influenced by, like, a lot of, I guess, cultural mythology and things. But honestly, what I love the most about this game is the combat, which is pretty crazy for an action RPG. Like, usually combat is a means to an end to experience the exploration and the story. But to me, it's almost like the main selling point of this game. So rather than playing like a lot of other RPGs or action RPGs, it plays more like God of War or Devil May Cry or Darksiders. Like, the combat is so smooth and feels awesome. Like, when you hit enemies, there's, like, slight delays and everything feels weighty. And then you can start unlocking a lot more skill-based things. So if you time the combos at the right time, it will do more different moves and different power. So it is very much an action RPG. It's almost like the quintessential action part of the RPG. And it's probably my favorite combat system in any action RPG, just because of how nice it is to play. And there's great weapons, lots of variety. There's a really cool ability, sustained ability. So generally, a lot of RPGs, you'll have, your health and your magic, and then you have abilities and you use that magic up, and then it might regenerate, might not. But this is pretty cool. If you don't really use a lot of those abilities, you can turn on these, I guess, permanent buffs that you can toggle on and off, and they will eat into basically your MP meter. So let's say I've got a shield that I want to activate. I activate it and it stays on, but suddenly my MP meter is now 2/3 of what it normally is. And so basically, if you don't want to use those abilities that use MP, you can instead just use your MP bar as almost like a meter to toggle these abilities on and off. So it's something I haven't seen used in many other single-player RPGs. It's probably a thing in MMOs. But it's just a really neat, I guess, just system. And it's got lots of, even the way the skill trees works is pretty cool and everything. But a lot of that is pretty standard for the course, especially, since this game was 2012, so I'm not going to say has the most modern systems to it. Specifically when you start getting into things like inventory management. One thing I was hoping they'd really fix was the way that it worked, and they didn't really touch much of that at all. And it's I think we're past that point now of impeding the player just to kind of put these arbitrary restrictions on them. I wish they kind of alleviated some of that. But yeah, I mentioned the presentation. It looks gorgeous for a game that came out in 2012. The terrain looks like great, like lots of color, and I think color is the key thing here. And the music is as cool as ever. So I mentioned Grant Kirkhope. You can definitely, once you know that he worked on it, you can start to kind of hear those I guess hallmarks. But if
Mm.
you didn't know that, it's just nice. So I guess overall, like I very high on this game, but I was also high on the original. I think they've done a good job, but I have hit a lot of bugs already, and that's a shame. The thing is, I knew I'd probably run into this because THQ Nordic and some of the developers I have working for them, sometimes the quality is a bit lacking on the finish to it. So the fact that they're working with a very well refined game to begin with, and then there's still a few bugs on top of it. Like I was running around for an hour, my character was missing their legs. If you ever wanted to see it, like there was just nothing between their
It's awesome.
and where the upper body started. But the worst thing was how they handled the launch, and I've got to call them out massively on this. So some people had the option, or you had the option to buy a special edition that gave you like a couple of days early access, or at least 1 day early access. So the game came out on Wednesday, right? But there was a day patch that wasn't ready yet. And that day one patch had the very hard mode. It had a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't there in the game yet. And the big thing for me and a lot of other people is it had no achievements at all. Like you couldn't unlock any of it. And because of that, they ended up delaying the day one patch to be a day two patch. So if you essentially wanted to play the game and not get screwed over by potentially having to restart your game, or if you wanted to play it on very hard, a lot of the people that bought it earlier, the diehard fans, then you had to wait an entire day after it was released to even be able to play it. And I was in that situation. So they
But did people know that was going to happen, or was that sort of
no. So
so you could have started playing your game 10, 15 hours in, and then they released this new difficulty setting, and you can't switch to it.
So I don't believe you could switch to it because you can swap the difficulty in any time, but because you were playing a game that was started on the previous patch, I don't believe you could swap to the very hard at that point. So for a lot of people that wanted to play it on that from the beginning, well, it wasn't there, so they couldn't play it, even start it. So the idea was, well, wait, I thought it was a very hard mode here. But the achievements thing seems to be a mistake. Like they didn't even realize that was going to be the case, and that's why I think the day one patch got delayed, is because someone had forgotten to toggle all that stuff on. So, the achievement list was live and stuff like that. But one thing I just want to give people also a bit of a heads up about this is that if you, I mentioned the inventory system in this game, so your limit is so harsh to begin with in this game, and you don't have access to like storage to put all your loot into until a little bit into the game. So if anyone starts it, just kind of after you get to like level 5, just mainline it to there's like a webwood area that's like below the main area with spiders. If you go there, you'll get access to a house that has storage, and then everything just becomes much easier to deal with after you've got access to like a storage thing. So overall, I love this game. I think I can't recommend enough for people that love a really meaty action RPG, but also people just love exploring because, as I mentioned, those zones are handcrafted. And so, unlike a lot of open world games where you're like, well, I'm just going to kind of move to my next objective, this is the kind of game you want to explore every nook and cranny of the entire map, and you kind of it's just so well crafted in that regard. So big thumbs up from me, and I think Remaster's they've done a great job with it.
So what's the most similar game to this game? Is it like a Skyrim or?
No, so I'd say it's probably closest to Fable in some regards. Much more open than Fable and much bigger. But it's almost. I wish Fable had this combat system. If Fable had this combat system, I'd love Fable even more, because Fable, the way that I love the tone of Fable more, and it's got lots of humor, and there's lots of cool stuff you can do in that game. But the combat can be lacking in number 2 and number 3, and I only have played Anniversary, not the original. This game has the combat, like it's awesome. So I'd say Fable's the closest comparison.
And would you say if someone was a fan of Fable, they should just buy this now, like at full price, or it's valuable at that price, or sort of wait until it goes on sale? Or
I definitely think it's worth the full price, but maybe give it a couple of weeks for them to iron some bugs out.
Ah, yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Sounds like you're enjoying it. It'll be interesting to see how you go with it in the future.
Yeah, definitely. It's a big game, so it'll probably take me a good couple of weeks to wrap up, I reckon. So
Yeah, nice.